Bernard Tobin here for RealAgriculture.com. Earlier this week, the federal government pledged $252 million to help the agri-food sector deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The collective reaction from the industry was disappointment. It's a start, but more is needed. One sector that was not included in the announcement was equine. To talk about the impact COVID-19 is having on thousands of working horses, I'm joined by Christy House from Equestrian Canada. Thanks for joining us, Christy.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Christy, just to start this thing off, so everybody knows, I guess, what we're talking about here. What's your definition of a working horse?
So we call them active equines, and they're specifically bred or raised or cared for in what would be an active equine facility or a commercial equine farm. So they can play a variety of roles, but they're considered to be unfinished or contributing to revenue and income generation within that facility. So that can range from a breeding animal that contributes to pedigree development, or a horse that plays an active role in the secondary on-farm activities, whether that's the development of youth and sport, or therapeutic use, or a variety of different public-facing programs that may be secondary agriculture parts of that business. But at the primary level, they're considered to be maintained and raised and developed for their venture into whatever their secondary industry ends up being.
Yeah, your release here says you've got about 46,500 horses, 8,500 equine facilities, and that could be training, boarding centers, riding schools, all those type of things. Can you tell me what the current situation is right now with riding stables and working horses? What is it a case where in many cases where if you have no riders, you have no revenue?
So it's definitely different dependent on which part of the country you're in. We're seeing some more severe realities, mostly in Quebec and Ontario, but it's definitely widespread across the country and different severity levels. But the reality is, for the most part, we did a survey, and most barns have faced between 60 and 100% loss in their revenue. So if they solely rely on public-facing activities such as therapeutic use and riding schools or racing, they've gone down to zero in terms of their revenue, but they still have those operational bills to maintain the health and welfare of those horses who provide those services within their business.
Yeah, what type of economic impact are we talking about here, Christy? The reality is, whether it's feed, hay, veterinarian services, a tremendous economic impact, and I guess the government needs to understand that.
Yeah, so, specifically, we just had Wilton Consulting Group help us with organizing some of this information. And just based on her internal analysis using the 2016 Census of Agriculture data, which we know is misrepresented because of how we're considered in that. A lot of the problem within our sector is they can't access farm registration numbers, so a lot of our data gets excluded from census data. But just in that alone, we contribute, between $910 million and $1.3 billion in hay and grain and bedding each year. So that's just part of the contribution to agriculture specifically that our sector represents. And again, knowing that that's probably severely underestimated of what the reality is. Horse Council BC alone estimates $125 million spent annually on feed and bedding in that province.
Now, you're disappointed, obviously, not to be included in the federal support announcement, specifically the Ag Recovery Fund announcement. What do you need to sort of secure the health and well-being of these horses?
Yeah, I think what we're asking for is we're not asking for a compensation of our losses. We're asking for wage subsidies for the facilities who need them in the areas that they need them to help maintain these horses until they're back in a position where they can get back to some business continuity. So these horses, some of them, they take years to develop the skills that they require to participate in the services and the public-facing programs that they do. They need a very specific mentality, and that's not something that you can find in any horse. What we don't want is for these family businesses who are family-owned, and a lot of times their sole source of income, to sell off valuable assets or offload valuable assets and not be able to return to business when, provincial or regional legislation so allows, without the skills of these horses that actually make them successful. So they're not an easily replaceable portion of the business, and they're very vital for the revenue that they generate.
So, Christy, you're asking for federal support of $11.5 to $13 million. Without that, what's the outlook for these businesses and these horses? Obviously, we're talking about thousands of businesses and thousands of horses that could be put down or destroyed.
Yeah, so we've heard from a variety of operations who are already starting to have those internal conversations and develop strategies in terms of what portion of their herd do they need to try to hang on to for as long as possible, because like I mentioned before, they need to be able to have the skills within the herd still so that when they can get back into some business continuity, they're still there. But they are facing cull and humane euthanasia decisions, or we've already seen barns that are posting these horses for sale. But the reality is the economic stress out there on the buyer is also not ideal. There's not a lot of disposable income that we're going to see in the near future, so people aren't buying the horses. And the businesses that may want to pick them up for their own use are in similar situations. So as an industry, we have come up with a framework for protocols that we're hoping the provincial governments will use to have us included in the first phases of reopening to make sure that they can get back to a position where they're generating some revenue. But the reality is, until we're out of a full phase out, they're not going to be able to maintain or go back to the capacity they were originally started with. So long term, without some intervention, they're still going to have to make these decisions. And we don't want that to be being made in the winter months when it's even harder for the offloading process.
Yeah. Hey, final question for you just to wrap it up. I mean, what does government need to understand about working horses? How do you get them on the radar?
They need to understand that our supply chain or our stages of development, they look a lot different than the other sectors. And I think that's how we end up getting lost, because a horse can remain in development or unfinished for, 10 to 15 years of his life. He can transition in and out of where he's at. Whereas, in cattle and pig, it's very direct. And in most cases, it's very a short-term production style. Whereas horses, they can, cross in and out of different sectors, and their skills develop through life in terms of what secondary industry they're crossing over into. So our primary agriculture looks a lot different. And we have been working with AAFC to try to, show them what part of us is primary agriculture and our secondary industries are what these working horses contribute to. But that can change for them throughout the cycle of their life.
Right. Well, hey, Christy, good luck with your support efforts. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully next time we talk, you'll have some better news, some good news.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time today.